You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to Tea Break Time Travel, where every month we look at a different archaeological object and take you on a journey into their past. Hello and welcome to episode 14 of Tea Break Time Travel. I am your host, Matilda Siebrecht, and today I am savouring a new tea, actually. It was given to me last week, and it's a sort of herbally, greeny, minty, lavendery one. If I list all the ingredients, it'll just take us forever, so I won't go in that. And joining me on my tea break today is Dr Tess Machling. And are you also on tea today?
I have to admit I'm on coffee.
Oh, that's right.
But I love the sound of your tea. I think that sounds wonderful.
It's one of those, I mean, why have just a normal standard tea when you can have one that has 20 different ingredients in it, right?
Exactly. I have a cupboard full of them. Yeah.
And are you a sort of hard black coffee in the morning kind of drinker, or a latte, or
No, it's just an instant a lot of the time, or proper coffee if I can be bothered making it. But yes, I'm quite lazy. So.
Fair enough. I admit, now that we've had our second child, there are some more coffees being drunk in the
yes.
in the teacup.
Yes, I remember it well. I am feeling your pain. Yeah.
Even though neither of us drink coffee, we only have coffee for guests. But there's been a few mornings where we've gone, should we have a coffee? Yeah, let's have a coffee.
Yeah, that will get me through today. Yeah.
Exactly. But tea today. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I have sort of the standard questions that I ask all my guests so that we can get to know them. And of course, the first one is, how did you first get involved in archaeology? And we'll go into your sort of specialization a bit later. But in terms of sort of archaeology in general, what first piqued your interest?
Yeah, I realised suddenly I've been doing archaeology in some form or another for 40 years, which makes me sound terribly
very
old.
Experienced. Wise and experienced.
Something like that, yes. But yeah, I mean, my mum and dad were always into history, so we did lots of museums and stuff when I was a kid, when I was very small. And then I had a wonderful primary school teacher, Mr. Colgate. And he used to take us around. I lived in a little village in Sussex, and he used to take us round on these little walks saying, this is where the poorhouse was, and there was a girl called so-and-so who lived here, and people used to walk all the way to here to go mine flint and everything. And it absolutely fascinated me. And then you do that thing that so many of us do, that you get into fossils. And then when I was about 12, I got hold of, I wasn't actually a member of the Young Archaeologist Club, but I got hold of one of their newsletters from somewhere. And there was a dig advertised in Sussex. So I went off to this dig, sliced my finger on a lovely flint flake on the first day there, ended up in the hospital with stitches.
Oh, gosh.
And then went back.
You paid the blood, toll.
Absolutely, the blood sacrifice, the scar on my finger that I have to this day. And yeah, from that point onwards, I was just basically, I just loved it. I'm always someone who's like being outside. You obviously get to meet loads of people. This was back in the day when kids could go and volunteer on sites. I mean, understandably now there are health and safety implications that we didn't really pay attention to back then, sadly. But yeah, started working most of my holidays, volunteering, went to university, UCL, got an archaeology degree, started working as a field archaeologist, went into being a prehistoric pottery specialist, then ended up in the 17th century Caribbean looking at fortifications.
Oh, wow.
And now I'm back in the Iron Age looking at gold. So, yeah, I've kind of always done it. It's in my blood, I think.
Yeah. I'm curious. You mentioned, so you started with pottery and then went to fortifications. Was there, what linked? How did you get
There is actually a link. Strangely enough. Dr. Elaine Morris, who's a fantastic pottery specialist down in Southampton, has connections to the island of Nevis in the Caribbean, and asked me, because literally I was living in London at the time, close to the British Library, if I wouldn't mind going and doing a bit of archival research for her. So I said, yeah, fine. Where's Nevis? Not a clue. Little island in the Caribbean. Oh, and it's a 17th century fortification. No idea about them either. And went and did this bit of research and discovered that not only was there one fortification out in the Caribbean, but there were actually 30 that nobody knew about, these little kind of coastal batteries. And again, a bit like how I got into talks, kind of found a research problem, thought, oh, that's really interesting, and just carried on researching it. And then someone said to me, oh, because we started with the research project out there, started going out there a couple of times a year to dig these things. And someone said, you realise you've probably got enough to do a PhD. So I ended up doing a PhD. So yes. I think a friend called it a mosaic archaeology career. I think that just about sums it up.
But I think that's fantastic. So I have recently been to a wedding and where I was the only archaeologist there. And of course, everyone's saying, the little small talk and saying, oh, so what do you do? And I said, oh, well, I'm an archaeologist. And it's inevitably the whole, oh, right, so which culture do you specialize in? Or, which region do you specialize in? And I mean, I'm sort of similar. I've been all over the place in all my research. And I think it's always great to hear that people are indeed jumping around, because that's the whole point, right? Archaeology, I don't know, I always say at least archaeology is not a topic, it's a frame of mind, because it's sort of more about how you approach a situation.
Definitely. And I know so many archaeologists that are similar. I mean, even ones that are working in a particular field, most people have got an interest in something else outside of work. And like you say, it all informs, we get so kind of stuck in our period bunkers, don't we? I'm a Bronze Age person or I'm a so-and-so. When none of that actually means anything. They weren't walking around in the Bronze Age thinking, right, 3 p.m. on Tuesday, we're in the Iron Age. That's it now. Abandon everything we had before. So, no, I think it's good. It helps. It helps us be a bit more broad, I think, if we've got lots of different interests.
Definitely. No, I can't agree more. Well, and I'll talk to you about this later a bit, actually, in the third section, because I think that'll be interesting to go into more detail. But second question, of course, as this is tea break time travel, we are traveling back in time. But if you could travel back in time, especially as you have such a wide range of interests, where would you go and why?
I would go back to the Iron Age, and I would go back to a gold workshop. Wherever that might be, and that would be half of it, landing up somewhere and going, oh, that's where you were making these things. Yeah, and I would love to see who was making what, how many of them there were, whether there were women involved. I'm convinced there probably were women involved. Yeah, the tools they were using, particularly how they were managing to do without blowtorches. That's what I would love to know, be a fly on a wall in an Iron Age gold workshop.
I admit, and we'll probably get into this later, but I have absolutely no idea how gold is worked. So I'm very curious indeed to hear more from your experience on that. And, a bit more information. But excellent. That's absolutely fair enough. I love indeed how, I think I've said this on every episode, but every single guest I've said, no one's ever said like, oh, I want to go back to this coronation of this king, or, something like that. It's always, I want to go to a small workshop or a tiny hut.
Don't we? Yeah.
So it's great. Well, indeed, thank you very much for joining me on my tea break today. And before we look in today's objects, there's been some hints speckled throughout so far, so you might have already guessed what we're looking at. But let us first journey back to the 1st century BC, to the northwest coast of Norfolk, in the east of what we now call England. It's a beautiful sunny day, the low scrub and the marshes of the field merging into the distance, into the dunes and the sandy shore. Out in the field, the wind carries the scent of the sea, rustling the long grasses, but here, in the shade of the trees, it is sheltered. Only the smallest breeze moves the hair of the man standing in the clearing. He's richly dressed, a finely woven tunic and trousers, held together with a belt, metal glinting at his wrists and neck. In his hands, however, is the brightest glint of all, as the sunlight reflects off the golden surface of what appears at first sight to be a thick, twisted ring. As he lowers the item towards a hole dug deep into the ground, we see that it's not actually a complete ring, it has an opening, marked by 2 hollowed circles decorated with intricate detail. And that is what we are looking at today, which is the torc, spelt T-O-R-C. And we'll get into the details soon, but first, I always like to have a look to see what the majority of the world wants to know about torcs. So the most asked questions on the internet, courtesy of Google search autocomplete. So, first question, fairly simple. What is a torc? And it was torc necklace and torc bracelet both came up. So I'm curious, in fact, what does a torc represent? Is it a necklace or a bracelet?
Right. I think it's both.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
I mean, the word torc comes from twist, as in, torc twist. So generally, if we're talking about torcs, we're talking about twisted wires, a bit like the Snettisham Great Torque. If anyone knows what that looks like, if you Google it, you'll get a picture.
Mm-hmm.
But more generally, within Britain, they tend to be twisted wires. Whereas if you're looking in Europe, you've got a number of different designs. So you actually have some that have these locking mechanisms, so they look like a complete circle. They don't have the gap in the front.
Okay.
And they actually have sections with a little, like a mortise and tenon joint on it that click out and then click back in. They come in all kinds of sizes. You do get ones that kind of have a 10 centimetre diameter. So they're potentially arm rings, or they could be for children. You also get some, there's an incredible one from Germany called the Trichtingen. I think it's Germany. I'm panicking now. It might be Switzerland. But anyway, it's enormous. This thing is like kilograms of silver with these bull's heads at the end. And the bull's heads terminals touch. And there's no way you could have got this necklace on. They've also got, the Romans talk about them being put on statues.
Okay.
So are they symbolic? Are they worn? I mean, some of them are definitely worn, because we've actually got the Newark torque, which is another one, is actually worn on the bases of the terminals. So it's obviously been on something, whether that's a statue or a person. But yeah, it's complicated things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and indeed, that sort of answers our next question, which was who wore torcs. So I guess we don't know is the answer?
No, we don't. I mean, there's potential that they were only occasionally worn, but may have been carried in ceremonies. I mean, you see towards the Roman period, you suddenly see a lot of iconography that has people holding torcs. And you think of the Gunderstrup cauldron. On one of the panels, there's Carunus holding a torque up. So whether they are partly to be worn, partly symbolic. I mean, I always think of them a bit like mare's necklaces. That maybe when they're not being worn, they're displayed or revered, or we don't know, I think is the short answer.
Okay. I mean, that seems to be the most standard answer in archaeology in general.
Yeah. I think we can get close to some ideas, but that's the thing, isn't it? So often people want definitive answers, and there aren't definitive answers about the past, because, like you say, we can't time travel back to
unfortunately
see what they were actually doing.
Yeah. Well, I guess that also then answers the next question, which is why did people wear torcs? So
yeah,
again, we don't know.
No, I mean, again, are they individual? Are they symbolic of a group? Yeah, I mean, I'm doing some work at the moment on the Snettisham torcs, which is the biggest hoard we've got in the UK. In fact, I think it's probably the biggest hoard we've got full stop in Europe.
Wow. Okay.
But there it almost looks as if each torque represented a person or a period of time.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, it's I'm almost wondering if they identify ancestry so that people would have had names for these, because every single torque is different. There's not one that's the same as another. They might be slightly similar, but they're never the same.
Okay.
So I do wonder if they were something that was given or produced at a certain time in somebody's life, or to identify something happening within a tribe.
Okay. Oh, that's fascinating. I didn't realize that they were also individual. I thought that maybe there was... Oh, that's amazing. That's really interesting.
Yeah, there's a couple of very simple ones. These kind of very simple where you've just got two bars that have been twisted together and then the ends have been looped. And they are literally just made out of wire, thick wire, rods that are similar. But even then you get a difference quite often in the way the wires have been twisted. Are they loose twisted or tight twisted? The shape of the terminals. They really are very unique pieces.
Okay. And but the twisting is what sort of connects them all? As in...
Yeah, and then you've got some that aren't, or you've got some that Yeah, and it is again. What is a torc?
Exactly. Well, that's what I'm curious. And indeed, how one defines a torc then.
Yeah, I think it basically comes down to period, to be honest with you. Because you've got things that people are wearing around their necks from very early on. I think we were going to talk about that later. But they are all made slightly differently. So you can get some that are literally 2 rods twisted together. You'll get some that are multiple rods twisted together. You'll get some where they've created these kind of springs of twisted wires that they then twist those together. That's like the great torc. There's a lot of different technological skills and a lot of artistic showing off. And I think that's what it is. I think it is craftspeople, and there is no reason this was men. It's a very important point to make. It's as likely to have been women who are almost showing off what they can do and trying out new things to make each torc something special.
Interesting. Oh, fascinating. Oh, yes. I'll save my further questions for later, because otherwise I'll go into this section will be 40 minutes long.
Yeah.
So the final question we had was, how do you wear a torc?
Well, yeah. I mean, as I say, the ones with the gap in the thing that most people ask us the whole time is, oh my goodness, how would you get that on the neck? Because the gap between the terminals is really small. But actually, most of them, it's about 3 inches, something like that gap. And if you actually feel your neck, I'm imagining all of these people feeling their neck, the amount that is actually solid in your neck is quite small. And if you actually pull on something that's got a 3-inch gap, it will go around your neck quite easily. Oof. You don't actually have to bend it or manipulate it too much. The other thing about these torcs, which no one realizes, is they're really springy.
Oh, right.
Because, of course, no one gets to pick them up. We all see them in cases and they look very solid. But the ones with the multiple wire springs, like the Snettisham Great Torc or the Newark Torc, when you lift them up, the terminals want to bang together.
Oh.
And they are they're firm, but they have a lot of give in them.
Interesting.
So, I mean, there's all these theories a lot of people have said about how you lift one torc terminal up to get it round your neck. Most of the time, you really don't need to. And you're putting excessive pressure on it, which is never a good idea. You're going to start damaging things if you keep bending them out of shape.
True. I had a very nice snake bracelet at some point, which went on, and it was sort of supposed to be put on and off like that. So they kind of overlapped a little bit, but you sort of bent them slightly out of shape and then put them on. And indeed, eventually, after a while, the head fell off. Which,
yeah. I mean, this is the thing we did. We did some work down at the National Physical Laboratory where they have this ultra high speed camera. And we opened the Newark Torc literally by only about 5 millimeters and then let it close naturally while it was filmed.
Okay.
And you look at where moves. This camera can pick up where moves on the torc. And we were really surprised in that actually the back of the torc, which is where everyone says, oh, they opened and closed them and the back eventually wore out and they broke. That wasn't where the movement was occurring. The movement was occurring around the edges.
Oh, okay.
And then when you look at a lot of these torcs that are broken, that everyone says, these broke at the back because they were open and closed. Actually, when you look at them, most of them have been cut or something else has gone on. So again, that's another one of those kind of bits of lore in inverted commas that we've managed to show probably isn't what was going on.
Oh, interesting. But they would likely have been, at least all the pictures I've seen is that you have the if there is an opening or if there is something that's
you have the opening at the front.
Okay. Interesting. So
because obviously the terminals are the really decorated bit.
Yeah, it seems to be most of the time indeed.
But on some of the European ones like Waldalgesheim or Erstfield, Waldalgesheim from Germany, Erstfield from Switzerland, they're actually kind of decorated on the back as well.
Oh, okay.
So they may have been seen in the round, either on a person or, again, like I say, maybe they are when they're not on a person, maybe they're being looked at somewhere.
Yeah. Or indeed, that could also tell us a little bit about the hair. Hair was then likely worn.
Suggest you have your hair up. Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise, can you imagine? You have this bit, at least my hair is so thick and curly. You wear a torc, it'll be hidden.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, torc would disappear.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, no, fascinating. Okay, well, those were sort of Google's most searched questions. There was actually a surprisingly little about it. Those were the only ones that came up, really. So there were a lot about talks with Vikings and things, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later, because I was curious about that. But for now, that's that for Google's most searched questions. We're going to have a very quick break, and then we will be back soon. So, welcome back. So now we know a little bit more about the sort of basic knowledge of talks, but perhaps, Tess, you could tell us even more about it, as you are an expert on the topic, as amongst many other topics, it sounds like. But so we spoke about it a little bit briefly. You mentioned gold and silver, but so what kinds of material were talks made from? Was it always these precious metals?
I mean, generally gold, silver and bronze. But there's a talk from Spettisbury down in Dorset on the south coast, which is actually iron. And there's one that came up from Northampton, Great Lawton, I think is the site, that was actually lead.
Oh, wow.
And of course, all we have is the non-organics. So there's possibility, because a lot of the twists, Julia Farley has talked about this, curator at the British Museum. Are a lot of these twists based on fabric, on yarn, things like that? So are we missing, were there leather talks? I don't know. There is zero evidence. But it might just be there.
That's really interesting. Now I'm trying to think. Oh, yeah, because you have also those sort of twisted leather. Well, that's the sort of plaited leather.
Yeah, exactly. They would be perfectly makeable out of leather, particularly if you're stiffening your leather. And these people know how to make saddles. They know how to work different things. So it is possible.
Okay. And do you know if any research has been done?
No,
experimental stuff?
No, I've never seen anything like that. And the problem that we have, of course, is these talks seem to be very symbolic. Mm-hmm. So, and they do just occur in hoards. And the majority of hoards are found by metal detectors and things like that. So unless you could find some on a waterlogged site or nice anaerobic conditions, I'm not sure we'd ever know.
And indeed, so that was actually another question I had. So from my very, very brief, shallow, quick looking up of talks, it seemed that indeed most of them had been found in hoards. So there hasn't been any kind of found just in general settlement types or anything, or just very rare?
Yeah, there haven't been.
Amazing. That's really interesting.
This is the bane of my existence, that the majority, I think we've got from this country, we have got about 400 talks represented from the UK. Mm-hmm. Now, of those, about 300, and actually it'd be about 450 from the whole of the UK. And of those, we've got about 300 represented from Snettisham. So that's not necessarily complete talks. That could be pieces of wire that we can identify as unique to a certain talk. Of the Snettisham 300, only about 60 of them are complete. Okay. And when you look at the rest of the country, we've only got about 90 talks represented outside of Snettisham, and only about 30 of those are complete.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
We're very much skewed towards what's going on at Snettisham.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, Snettisham still hasn't been published. It's due out any time now. But the majority of other talks that we've got are either antiquarian finds, so they were dug up 19th century, early 20th century, often by shepherd boys. Shepherd boys seem to be able to find talks better than anybody else. And unfortunately, a lot of them, they tended to keep the nice ones, and the rest of the hoard went to goldsmiths to be melted down. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The other problem that we've got recently is that most of them are detected finds. And although some of the sites of detection have been examined, And with Blair Drummond, actually in Scotland, we have actually got torcs associated with the site. Fraser Hunter dug it, and there does seem to be a building that the hoards were associated with.
Okay.
Most of the time, we have no other contextual information. You'll get coins. So we've got coins at Snettersham, but of course all of those are deposition dates rather than making dates. And we know that these torcs are hanging around sometimes for a couple of 100 years before they go in the ground. So it is very tricky.
Yeah. Probably just quickly, for those who are listening in who don't know what a hoard is, perhaps you could just provide a...
Yeah, I mean, it's the traditional view. I probably shouldn't use the word hoard. I should probably talk about deposition, because hoard is a very loaded term. But traditionally, hoards were always seen as, in the days of invasion and everything being seen as invasion and trouble, and hoards were very much seen as the panicking locals burying all their goodies before running away and then being murdered and never coming back to collect them.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas nowadays we tend to understand that although there are a few hoards that are like that, the majority of hoards seem to be kind of, I'm going to use the word ritual. Yeah. I don't have a problem with ritual. The way you get dressed in the morning is ritual.
That's
we
true,
put our socks on first or whatever else. But they are definitely associated with ceremony, with things that we can't explain readily. They don't have a practical, inverted commas, purpose. And in the case of torcs, as I say, Snettisham is this ridiculous anomaly of a huge number of torcs, which all went in the ground, we think, very, very rapidly, potentially within a couple of weeks even.
Okay.
If you want to know more about this, there's a lot. We have a website called The Big Book of Torcs, and you can go and read. Everything's open access on there, and you can go and read all about it.
It's perfect. I'll provide the link in the show notes for anyone who wants to read.
But outside of Snettisham, the normal picture is kind of 3 or 4 torcs being buried in a discrete little group. They're usually away from settlements. They're quite often on raised ground or slopes. Yeah, it's offerings, I think. Mm-hmm. My feeling is that, my feeling is a lot of them are to do with offerings against the Romans coming. It's almost like the torc is so symbolic of the Iron Age.
Mm-hmm. And do you know, I mean, obviously I know you focus more on UK, British torcs or those aspects, but do you know if it's similar in other are torcs found in other places, for example?
Yeah, they are. I mean, all across Europe, you find torcs of some form or another. Mm-hmm. The UK, we seem to like them a lot more, but on the other hand, we also have a lot more detecting going on, so there is recovery bias going on.
Right.
Particularly in the UK, we have forms that are very specific to here. So the kind of ring terminal torcs, which can either be just simple rings or these big expanded kind of donut shapes like the Great Torc, they are very British, very UK. Whereas if you look in France and Germany, they tend to do different things. Like I say, you have the kind of complete circle, or you have different designs. I mean, in Spain, in Iberia, they have these almost kind of teardrop shaped terminals, or these strange kind of apple core shapes. But again, similar theme, 2 terminals on something. Mm-hmm. But the specific design of it seems to be quite unique to whichever area of Europe you're in.
Oh, interesting. That's good to know.
It's like all things Iron Age. They kind of have a general theme.
Yeah.
But then regionally and locally, they go off and do their own thing.
Interesting. Yeah, which, I mean, I guess similar today as well.
Yeah, exactly.
In those respects. And do you know if they're also found in hoards or in, shall we say, ritual deposition?
No, there are hoards, definitely.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, things like the Cotillon hoard with that huge number of coins from Germany also has a lot of torcs.
Interesting.
There's the Erstfield hoard, the Waldaugesheim. Similar themes again, but not necessarily the same reasons, I don't think.
Okay. That's so fascinating though, because I mean, I'm sure there are plenty, but just that's the first time I'm hearing of artifact that has only been found in these kind of depositions, because generally it's sort of, oh, they're mainly found, but then you have a few scattered here, or, you know, it's half and half or something. So that is very...
Yeah, and also Europe, they have the tradition of, because earlier they tend to put torcs in graves. So like the Vix torc, which if you look it up is absolutely one of the most stunning pieces of gold work. And that's actually within a grave. Whereas over here, they never put them in graves. It just doesn't happen.
Okay.
So it's almost like you've got changing traditions going on. So yeah, it's fascinating. But I just wish we could find some torcs with some really solid dating evidence. That would help me immensely.
Which, because indeed it seems you're sort of mentioning Iron Age, and from what I've seen in sort of popular culture, torcs are generally associated with the sort of Celtic.
Yes.
I hate to use that word, but Celtic cultures, shall we say?
Yeah.
And that sort of you would agree with that situation, because
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got the complication that, of course, we have the Romans over here in the UK, but in places like Scandinavia, they don't. So the long Iron Age.
Yes.
What we would be talking about early medieval, they're still talking about Iron Age. So it's all a bit, dates, yeah.
Interesting, because indeed another question I wanted to ask, because when I was looking it up, like I said, a lot of things came up about Viking torcs, and I feel like indeed when you look up replicas of things to get, I quite enjoy gathering replicas, so I have one of the apple core ones from the Iberian Peninsula. But there were a lot of Viking references made. So is that another...
There's lots of things with wolves as terminals. And, I'm not sure those were ever Viking. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely have neck rings. Obviously, this isn't my period so much, so, you know. But from what I've seen, I've been doing a bit of research on various things recently, that you have, they're more to do with bullion and things like that the Vikings have this whole thing of giving rings. And these rings are these kind of neck rings and arm rings, which are very controlled weights. But yeah, there's an interesting bit of research. I can't say anything about it now, but watch this space in a couple of months, because it could get fun.
That's actually, funny story, that was one of the reasons that I first got into artifact analysis as a specialization, was because I did a Viking archaeology course at Aberdeen Uni, my undergraduate alma mater, with Karen Millick, and we were talking about this what were they called, silver bullion, I guess, which is just like a ring with lots of other bits of silver attached to it, that seemingly the objects themselves aren't what's important, it's the weight of the silver. And I found that so fascinating. So that's what
and also now they're starting to recognize as well, as I say, I've been reading a lot about this, because it was always assumed it was silver, whereas they're now recognizing that actually the Vikings were using gold as well. And they seem to be treating it similarly and differently. So although it had a kind of bullion wealth, it may also have had an artistic, creative value as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, fascinating.
Oh, I look forward to hearing about whatever it is.
Watch this space.
Well, I'll definitely have all your information in the show notes so people can keep checking up on you and see what's coming out. Very curious. Interesting. But they do only then emerge, because, I mean, you mentioned that there was one or two that were made from sort of iron, but the rest were from silver and gold. I mean, gosh, I should know this. I'm a prehistorian, but I never did metal. When does that start to be used more regularly? Can you already see them in the Bronze Age sort of emerging as a thing?
In the Bronze Age, you've got, because again, you've got these neck rings. So you've got lunula, those kind of crescent moon shaped flat neck rings, breastplates, whatever they are.
Yes, the sort of that look like a collar almost.
Yeah, and then you also get the gorgets, which are more elaborate. But you've also got within the Bronze Age these kind of twisted. What they actually do is they get if you think of it in cross section, it looks like a cross piece of wire.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you twist that, you get these kind of flanged. It's very cleverly done.
Oh.
And it looks, if you go and look up Bronze Age torque, and then they have these kind of very simple long terminals. But some of these can be over 1 meter long, and no one's quite sure, because they quite often coil them up for burial. Again, in hoards. But how are they being worn? Because at over 1 meter long, they're too big for a neck.
Yeah.
Maybe they're to go around a stomach. I've seen people suggest they may be actually for pregnant women.
Ah.
Who
God,
knows?
that would be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's definitely, we've got gold being used quite a lot, and it's very pure, very good quality stuff, going right up to the late Bronze Age. But then there's kind of a gap, and it seems that, I don't tend to believe this, because at the moment, since we've been doing talks, every single find that comes up changes the picture. So just about every couple of years, it goes back 100 years as something else appears.
Okay.
The last time this happened was in 2016, where the Leakfrith hoard came up, and suddenly the whole dating for talks went back 150 years.
Okay.
So it is possible it's not a real gap. My feeling is the craft that they're showing suggests that they've been doing it for a bit longer, that when we see it, it's already a very well developed craft.
Because I was going to ask, because surely, whether you see, random twisted bits of metal kind of in earlier context, but I suppose they wouldn't necessarily have been identified as something to do with talks from earlier periods.
No, I mean, and there's all sorts of odd things. There's something called ribbon talks, which you get a very plain, simple form of in the Bronze Age, but then that reappears potentially from about 300 BC onwards as this very elaborate. But unless you look very carefully, they look quite similar. So have the people making the Iron Age ribbon talks seen the earlier ones? Because they all seem to be occurring in Scotland and Ireland and Wales. So, yeah, is it a continuation that we haven't recognised the kind of middle bit yet?
Yeah. No.
Or is it that someone has gone back and found something or seen something and gone, I know what I can do with that?
Yeah. And I guess that's also, it's something really interesting, the fact that you said they're sort of similar enough but slightly different styles, whether it was something that just kind of naturally happened, everywhere.
Yeah.
Or
we work with a lot of goldsmiths, and goldsmiths like to play around with ideas. And they will look at some person at one goldsmith's work and kind of take something from it and then make something of themselves about it. So it doesn't surprise. I mean, we think of people in the past as being these kind of, I don't know, nameless, faceless, characterless people. But craftspeople, I think, have always been craftspeople, to develop these incredible skills and ideas and designs and creativity means we actually wrote a paper working with some goldsmiths, and they were saying you need to be talking to people, you need to be seeing other people's work. You can't just do this in isolation. So, yeah, I like to think they're all kind of, because I think it is a very skilled craft.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, gosh, just looking at some of these pieces, I'm thinking, wow.
Yeah. I mean, we've worked with a team of about 10 goldsmiths, and some of the goldsmiths we'd worked with are quite old now, and they were trained under the apprentice system, where they were using less machines, things were all being done by hand. And they looked at the talks and said, yeah, I could do that. Wouldn't be a problem. Some of the younger goldsmiths who hadn't had so much of the traditional training were saying, I don't know about that. And there were some other people who said, no, I really wouldn't feel confident about doing this. I mean, it really is a high-end craft. You would have to know what you were doing. But of course, the other aspect of this is it's likely that they were starting training very, very early.
Okay.
There's a wonderful image by Tom Bjorkland, who does those fantastic kind of portraits of people in prehistory. And it's of a woman who's working bronze. and around her are her little children. And I'm sure, I mean, my dad was an incredible crafts person. He was a carpenter and used to make all kinds of things, guitars and whatever. And all the while I was little, I was kind of hanging around the garage when he was working. And it drips into you. You kind of start watching and learning and watching and learning. And it's not necessarily that you're being trained as such, but from a very young age, this was part of life, I'm sure. And then as they get older, and by 6 or 7, kids are quite capable of doing quite complex things.
Mm-hmm.
So potentially we've got people that are trained hugely longer than they are now.
Yeah. But do you think indeed it was sort of a training you sort of specialized in making torcs, or was it general jewelers, or was it just everyone, like anyone could twist some wires together, like you say?
Yeah, I mean, it is very specialized. And this is a problem as well, because we tend to, in archaeology, talk about metal workers. And metalwork can involve so much that the skill of a blacksmith working iron is completely different. The workshop is different. You need fire, you need noise, you need big tools. You don't actually need light because you need to be able to see the changing color of things. If you're talking about casting, so casting bronze and things like that, you're talking, again, different skill set.
Yeah.
And then once you get onto bronze sheet work, where you're actually hammering things, you've got to know about the metal very specifically, how it's going to behave. It all starts to become different. And then gold is the extra step on from that.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the later period, silver. But we tend to lump metal workers in together, but their skills and where they work and what we're going to see in the archaeological record is very, very different. I mean, for gold, my feeling is they probably were trained in working bronze sheet. We have various similarities between thicknesses and things like thicknesses of the metal and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there were that many goldsmiths around. I mean, there were a lot of bronze workers, because if you're thinking about villages or communities, you've got tools, you've got axes, you've got all sorts of things, chisels, and they need sharpening, they need remaking, casting. That's at a very local level. I'm sure every community had one. But with gold, there's not that much gold around. So, and learning to work it the way they do, they have to have been working with it quite often, I think.
Okay. So it really was a precious metal.
Yeah, and I think also they are, because gold is about the one material that doesn't tarnish. It's very ductile. It does all kinds of weird things. It's like butter when you work it. It's beautiful material. And I think these guys would have been seen as separate or something special, or... And also, who are they working for? Are you having people coming to them, or are they traveling? Is the gold moving? Are the craftspeople moving? Again, all answers I think craftspeople are moving, because I think then that fits in with the thing of them seeing lots of other people's work.
Yeah.
And that could well explain why in Europe we have kind of similar but different things going on.
Yeah, because there's sort of a limit to how far you will travel, maybe, but you travel enough to meet someone else who's travelled far.
And also when you read, I mean, if you look at the account of Pythias, or you look at what the Romans were up to once they come to the UK in 55 BC, they are constantly talking about travel. You know, they are travelling backwards and forwards from Rome the whole time. Pythias is off all over the place. And I don't see there's any problem with goldsmiths doing that as well.
Yeah.
It would explain a lot of the things that are happening where you've got these kind of ideas being picked up
in different places.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier about, that it's not necessarily men doing it, and you talked about the depiction of a woman working bronze and her children there. So this is, I guess, also something we don't know.
No, I mean, we work with female goldsmiths as well, who are as capable of making these.
Mm-hmm.
And my feeling is the apprenticeship systems in this country starts at about 1300, I think. But there's always been ways of passing on craft, and that has to be shown. you can't kind of draw it or watch a video or whatever like we can do now.
Yeah.
You've got to actually sit with somebody who is making something, who says, right, this is what you do. No, don't do it like that. Do it like this, blah, blah, blah. And if we're thinking about that, traditionally, apprentices have gone from father to son or down the male line. But like I say, that the only records we've got are from about 1300 onwards, I think, or 1100 onwards. But we do have female goldsmiths recorded in London in the early medieval period. And also, I mean, my family line is I'm kind of destined to do this, because my family were all Huguenot goldsmiths.
Oh, there you go.
And
it's fate.
I know. Came over in the early 1700s, and then in a direct line from 1722, I think it is. And that's just as far as we know when they came over. They were probably doing this for years before in France. Direct line from that period to my great-grandfather in 1936, and the line only broke because he died early. All of them were goldsmiths, father to son, father to son, father to son, and diamond setters.
Wow.
So that's kind of 300 years.
Yeah.
I don't think it's inconceivable that in prehistory we were looking at a similar thing. And the logical kind of, it would have been within families or groups, connected groups. So the child would learn from the adult. The logical thing of that is potentially families of goldsmiths, in the same way that you have trades now or you had trades before.
Yeah.
And if you've got that scenario, if you had a girl, I don't think you're gonna
go,
oh no, you can't
say, oh, well,
you can't make these.
We've finished now.
Yeah. Because it would effectively kill off your line if you do that. And you've got all these 100 years of experience and knowledge, and because that's all held by people, it's not held in books at that point.
Yes, true. Yeah.
So,
and like you say, it makes sense if that's what you see on a day-to-day, from your father or mother.
And particularly also the association early on, and then even in the later period, because they talk about Boudica wearing the gold necklace. There is an association with women and gold.
Yeah.
There's nothing to say that they were women, but there is equally absolutely nothing to say that they weren't.
Oh, I think, yes, that's a good concluding sentence. I think we're going to have another quick break now so that people listening can have an opportunity to top up their tea, but we will be back soon. So, welcome back, everyone. I hope that the teacups are now full and the biscuit jar is emptier. And Tess, of course, we did already introduce you in the first section of this episode very briefly, but perhaps we can go into a little more detail now. So I think actually what we did is that you are an independent researcher as opposed to being sort of affiliated with a university or a museum. Was this always the case?
I am. Yes, I guess. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how I ended up there. How do any of us end up anywhere? But after I finished my PhD, when was that? Back in 2004. I then had my daughter in 2005. And I carried on working for the Prehistoric Society, which I think we'll talk about a bit later. And then when I started researching torcs, in the same way as when I'd started researching fortifications, it was just because I was enjoying it. And I was lucky enough to have the Prehistoric Society as an income and doing admin. So it was more, not a lesser task, but I wasn't using my brain in the same way. So I could do research as well on top of that. And then I started thinking about kind of formalizing things and maybe going into academia, but then decided that actually it's quite nice staying as an independent researcher. And when I look at what so many of my lovely colleagues in the UK are going through currently, solidarity to all of them, it just seemed an easier way of doing things. But you've got to be quite strict with yourself, definitely.
I can imagine, especially, I mean, I only did it very briefly, and I'm not sure I'd really have classified myself as an independent researcher. It was more I was trying to find a position and I couldn't, so I just kept going because I enjoyed it and wasn't getting, unfortunately, paid for anything. But I can imagine you have the extra freedom and the flexibility, but I suppose the financial security, shall we say, is a little less than.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the classic position of female archaeologists that, I mean, I'm divorced now, but it was my partner that was funding a lot of my lifestyle, as is so sadly the case for so many archaeologists, male and female, that a partner who's got a proper, in inverted commas, job
yes,
ends up sorting out a lot of different things. I mean, luckily, I've always been self-employed because from being a prehistoric pottery specialist, working with the Prehistoric Society, picking up bits of research, actually paid research at things like the National Archives and the British Library.
Mm-hmm.
And now doing this, we kind of get the occasional paid lectures, bit of paid teaching, bits and bobs that you can then plough into the next museum visit you want to do, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's not a living.
Yeah, unfortunately. Well, because I get a lot of questions through my various channels asking, how do you get into archaeology? Or like, is archaeology a proper job? Indeed.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was really interesting. Indeed, so far we've had on this show, we've had sort of crafters, but also academics. And so I thought it was interesting to have someone who's doing the research, but from, an independent standpoint. So I was wondering if you could, perhaps elaborate a little on the kind of advantages, the disadvantages. What advice do you wish you had given yourself, shall we say, when you first decided to go this route?
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky. Obviously, I'm older. I'm 52 now. It makes life easier because you're more established. My daughter's now 17. I don't have those issues to deal with. She's kind of her own independent person, really. And as I say, I've been lucky in that when I came through, you could get a job in archaeology. I've never been unemployed. I've never earned a lot of money, but I've never been unemployed.
Yeah.
The Prehistoric Society job is the kind of constant that has meant that my rent or my mortgage has always been paid.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, you can pick up bits and pieces. In terms of academically, I'm lucky in that working for the Prehistoric Society gives me library access at UCL,
mm-hmm.
which is the big thing that I think most independent researchers struggle with, because obviously paywalls and things like that, if you don't have library access.
Mm-hmm.
The way we've tried to do it, I firmly believe in open access, 100%. So as we've talked about before, the Big Book of Talks, you will find everything on there. You don't have to pay for any of it.
Perfect.
We've tried to do at least one peer review paper a year so that keeps us academically credible. But we also publish various bits and pieces on our website. We've also independently peer reviewed. Had a marvelous friend who acted as editor in inverted commas and then found two peer reviewers in inverted commas.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And it was actually a superb process because both peer reviewers anonymized themselves very quickly and said, if we're going to do this differently, let's do it properly.
Yeah.
And we had some wonderful conversations about the paper, and the paper, which is on the grotesque talk from Snettisham, was all the better for it.
Yeah.
But it is open access and it's up on our website and anybody can download it and read it.
And I mean, that's all the peer review is, right? Is
exactly. These people were peer reviewing for journals. It's not that they're not qualified to be peer reviewers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have fundamental issues about a lot of the way we do academia because I'm seeing more and more. There are people who, it depends how high you are up the tree a lot of the time. We've had papers in PPS, but a lot of that's to do with the fact I've got doctor in front of my name. I'm known within the community. Had I been an independent reviewer with an independent researcher with no background in inverted commas, would we have been able to do what we do? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite sad. Yeah.
And indeed, a lot of the at least so I recently almost finished my PhD, still need to defend, but I did an article-based one, so you had to publish 4 to 5 academic articles, and a lot of them were open access, which was great, and also free to publish. So you didn't have to pay anything to actually publish it, which I was very appreciative of, and didn't realize that that's not the norm until I then did the last 2 papers, and both of them I had to pay to publish a ridiculous amount of money, but also pay to make it open access. So, I mean, full disclosure, I'll say the amount. I had to pay $2,000 to publish a 36-page paper, and then you have to pay the same amount on top of that, which I think a lot of people don't realize when they're complaining that things aren't open access as well. But also, that is a really bad thing. Well, anyway, I won't mention which journals.
And also image rights. I mean, any artifact person who is publishing an artifact-based paper will tell you image rights kill more things than anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, that was part of the reason that we set up the Big Book of Talks, because we wanted to show, particularly as the research we were doing initially was kind of seemed to be controversial because it disproved a lot of previous research that had been done.
Excellent.
We wanted to show exactly why we were saying what we were saying, and the only way you can do that with artifacts is with images.
Yes.
And drawn images, okay, fine, they can show and they are wonderful, but you can always slightly adapt a drawn image to make it look what you show.
And especially if it's controversial anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for that grotesque talk paper that we produced, I think it's got 40 images in it. Now, all of those are the British Museum. All of those would have been at least £90 each.
Yes.
By the time you've got 40 images, you're looking at an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
Or, again, journal publications, you can't have that number of images.
Yes, a lot of time. Or they have to be in black and white or...
exactly. So we found it's really useful. I don't know. We've yet to see... I don't think we've been doing this long enough. We are starting to get cited now in various different things.
Mm-hmm.
But it'd be interesting to see whether people start citing. I know we're on various university reading lists, the website is. It will be interesting to see whether the website articles start getting cited. I suspect they won't, because they're not officially peer-reviewed.
Yeah.
But in a way, I don't care. I don't have a career to forge. I would rather get the information out there. And if we get the information out there, people can judge whether we're telling the truth or not.
Yeah.
Have we provided the evidence? So that's kind of the level of I'm at. I've suddenly realised in my older years that we forget about the true meaning of education.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to educate people in the widest sense, whoever they are, wherever they come from. And I don't think the traditional models of academia necessarily fit that.
I could not agree more. I mean, and that's one of the main reasons I started this podcast, to be honest.
Well, exactly. I mean, we do all sorts of things. I mean, I have a big Twitter following where I share information. We do blogs. We do things we've done magazines, the British Archaeology, the CBA magazine, videos, lectures, all kinds of stuff. It's all on our website, and hopefully there will be something for everyone, be they the kind of die-hard academics who want the absolute evidence or members of the public who just want to know about shiny things.
Yeah. Well, but then it's great that because I think a lot of the time, if I'm looking up things, just small things for these podcasts or for the little reels I do on Instagram or something, I want to make sure that I have the correct information. And a lot of the time then I do look at papers because I think, okay, well, these are academic peer-reviewed papers. But then it's great when you do find a resource like this that is provided by people who are researchers. Like you say, they don't have to be affiliated with the museum, but it's sort of a difference between someone who's a slight potential pseudo-archaeologist.
Yeah, exactly. I watched a couple of videos on YouTube versus I have actually got the evidence and here it is, so you can interrogate it yourself. Yeah,
exactly. So I think that's a fantastic resource. I'll definitely be putting the link to all of this in the show notes. So hopefully people will see.
I added last year a further reading page, so there is literally just a page of references for anyone who wants to read about it all.
Perfect. Oh, that sounds good. And you mentioned already the Prehistoric Society, of course, and I think that a lot of people, both even within academia but also outside of academia, they know that these societies exist, but what are these societies, I guess, and why should people join them, and what's the
Yes, I'm the membership secretary for the Prehistoric Society, and I have been for 28 years, so if I don't know about the Prehistoric Society, basically, fundamentally, we are a learned society, so we produce a journal, the Proceedings of the Prehistoric Society, but we also do a lot of other things besides. So we have a newsletter that comes out 3 times a year. We run a lot of events, lectures, conferences. We also, on our website, have educational resources, which will fit in with the England and Wales national curriculum. But we've also got things that can be used for home learning. They can be used for adult learners. We've got signposts, A4 downloads for sites that you can go and visit around the country. We do a lot of different things. We obviously have an active social media presence. A lot of our lectures now are online because we realised how wonderful the possibilities of Zoom were.
Yes.
And we found it's been so nice because there's so many people we've managed to connect with who either have caring responsibilities, access issues, financial issues, and they can watch things online for free from all over the world as well. So yes, we do a lot, and I'm very proud of the Prehistoric Society because we are constantly moving forward.
And do you have to be affiliated with anything in order to join? Do you have to be an archaeologist? Okay, perfect.
Nope, anybody can join at all. We have, obviously, that's the other beauty of this, because we have most of the professional prehistorians in the world as members, but we also have amateur archaeologists, we have students, we have people who have just got an interest in prehistory, and we're trying providing something for all of them. But if you come to our lectures, you will see we do have, because we were founded in 1935, we are the leading organisation for prehistory, and it means we can phone people up and say we would like a lecture on this, or we would like you to do this, that and the other. So well worth it. And it is not expensive either.
It is not. I can confirm.
Yes, which if you're an individual ordinary member, it's £45, but if you're retired, it's £35, and if you're a student, it's only £20. And that will give you all of our publications, access to lectures. We also provide grants, various different grants for students, research projects, museum collections, etc., etc., etc. And all of that includes postage and packing anywhere in the world. So there you go.
Yes, I was lucky enough to get the research fund back when I was in between studentships. So it was I was still technically a student, but I didn't have a job yet.
Yes, and again, that's another possibility for independent researchers. You have to be a member of the society to apply, but you don't have to be in an institution or anything else. If you can make the case, we will fund you.
Yeah, which I think a lot of people, I know that a lot of, for example, certainly my friends of my kind of age, and I mean, I've just finished the PhD and I did the kind of classic, undergrad, master's, PhD, worked a little bit in commercial, but now I'm sort of going, I think, a little more outside academia. And there's a lot of people I know who wanted to continue in academia, but just indeed can't find the job. And so I think it's really great that there's still these communities that you can have, because I mean, to me, at least, that was one of the main pros of working in academia, was that you have this network. But I think that it's nice that there's these societies that still give you that network outside of.
And I think people are realizing now, I mean, the number of, very successful, very well-researched books coming out, things like Becky Ragg-Sykes' Kindred, Kat Jarman's River Kings.
Oh, yeah.
I think people are seeing that academia is not the only way.
No, definitely. I think, I mean,
crossed.
Which I'm very happy for.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, as a final thing, because this was actually something that always pops up whenever I Google you. It's your So, and I remember seeing them and going, no, surely they're not chocolate. So apparently you make chocolate artifacts.
I do make chocolate artifacts, yes. And it's the one thing I'll be at a conference, and obviously I have quite a distinctive name. And I'll suddenly notice someone reading my name badge, and then the eyes come up and it's like, you're the one who makes the, yes, yep, I'm the one who makes the chocolate artifacts. Yeah, I'm not entirely, well, what it was that Roland and I, who I work with looking at talks, there's various schemes, because at some point we want to make a talk, a replica one, because Roland is a museum standard replica maker, and he makes all kinds of gorgeous things.
Oh, beautiful.
And we were talking about how we would get them, because this is how we got into talks, was talking about how they were made, and him saying, I don't think they're made the way they say they are, and me saying, oh, really? And then going off and doing research and blah, blah, blah. But one of the ideas that we had of how we were going to raise money to make a talk, Roll suddenly said, I know, we'll make chocolate talks and sell them in the museum, and then we can make some money. And it's like, okay, so could you do this? And it was like, I don't know. I've got no background in this whatsoever. And it was thanks to, I made a silly kind of wax copy of a terminal just when I was fiddling about at one point, and then realized you can buy this food grade silicone molding putty, which basically creates molds like those ice cube trays that you get in various things. So I covered this wax mold in this silicone putty, cut it all off, stuck it back together again, and poured chocolate in it, and ta-da, I had a talk terminal.
Amazing.
In chocolate. And then it was kind of like, well, it's chocolate, I need to make it look more like, and then discovered the wonderful world that is cake making ingredients, where you can buy all sorts of paints that are all edible, and gold sprays and goodness knows what else. And then from there it kind of became a bit of a challenge, that once I'd made one thing, obviously Roll, being a replica maker, had a lot of things that I could cover in this silicone moulding putty.
Right, yeah.
And the only rules have ever been, there's no internal scaffolding, and it's got to be 100% edible. So all of the paint and everything, the chocolate. And then you start getting things like, oh, there's an antler comb, a Viking antler comb. That's very thin. Could I do that? And so you try it, and yeah, okay. So most things I've only made once or twice. And it's very much a hobby. And usually by the time I've finished making something, I'm absolutely sick of chocolate, because various people have said to me, oh, you should do it commercially. It's like, no, it would destroy it, absolutely destroy it. But it's certainly a talking point. And also, again, I know it sounds daft, but another educational thing.
Definitely.
But there's a lot of people who will kind of come for the chocolate and stay for the talk about talks. You know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and I mean, I can imagine also it does. You yourself will probably get more of an insight into different aspects of the artifacts as well if you're having to think
it's really interesting actually, because the Nether terminal, which is this little gold detached terminal that I made in chocolate, originally they were saying that these torcs were cast, so molded effectively like I was doing in chocolate, and I could never get it to work properly in chocolate. It kept having bubbles in certain places, and sure enough, these torcs weren't actually cast, they're made of sheet gold.
So it's a research method.
It is. And there's various things when I've been making them that I've said to Roll, when I've made a chocolate one, I went, that was a real problem. And he'll go, yeah, I had that problem when I was casting it, because this bit's too thin or this bit's too, So you do it bizarrely. It is actually relevant.
No, I know it's not as necessarily related to the rest of this episode, but I just thought it was too interesting a hobby. Something.
But yes, it's as I say, it's definitely the thing at conferences that you get remembered for.
Oh yeah, well, and like you say, it's a form of outreach in itself as well, right?
It is
sort of more approachable.
Definitely there have been times with people where, I mean, the Nether terminal that I've got, because we were lucky to be able to mould off a plaster cast copy of the terminal, so I actually have an exact copy in chocolate. And that one, you give lectures and you talk about it and it immediately breaks the ice.
Yeah.
If I'm ever a bit panicky about talking about something contentious, you kind of go, here's a chocolate talk, and people laugh and it's
Please
fine.
like me.
Okay. Yeah. I can do this now.
Don't rip me to shreds. I made you chocolate.
Yeah, exactly.
No, very interesting hobby. And it makes me want to try and
literally, if you can get, unfortunately, the food grade stuff that I used to use, they've just stopped making.
Oh no.
So I'm not sure, because I've tried various other ones and it doesn't work in the same way. But yeah, the basic principle is if you can cover it in silicone moulding putty and manage to get it off, that's half the challenge, is then taking off the mould so that you can put it back together again. Yeah. And then just fill it with chocolate and you'll be amazed. It's not that difficult. People seem to think, oh my goodness, this woman has some amazing artistic talent.
Well, no, you need to keep that going.
Yeah.
We'll cut that bit, it's fine.
No, do have a go.
Yeah, no, I've got a lot of replicas here, so now I'm looking at them all going,
Yeah, the other thing that's wonderful is if you can get the kind of the ice cube trays, and there's various things now for resin moulding that you can get. All of those would work in chocolate and just have fun. I used to just make tiles, little square tiles of chocolate, and then people would paint them like medieval tiles and things like that. It's lovely.
Someone does that. I'm trying to remember who it is. Someone does biscuits and she makes them.
Oh, I
can't remember what her name is.
Exquisite.
They're beautifully
exactly
created. And I think she creates them for museums sometimes as well.
Yes. And they're all hand painted. I mean, they are stunning. I know exactly who you mean.
They're very beautiful.
That is true talent.
It is. Well, so your pieces look fantastic. I remember you sharing some pictures and me going, that's not chocolate. And then I was going, oh, wait, it is. Wow.
Yeah, I actually I had an Armorican axe that I'd made for a friend, and we were at a conference. And I gave it to her and I got it all wrapped up in greaseproof paper and I gave it to her. And she was just, oh my goodness. She trotted over to show a curator, a prehistoric curator. It's like, yeah, it's an axe. So what? No, look at it. It's an axe. So what? No, smell it. So it totally fooled a curator. So
excellent. Yes. That's the test.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, I think that marks the end of our tea break today. Sounds like you've got a lot of exciting secret projects to be getting on with. So I look forward to hearing about them. But thank you so much for joining me today, Tess, and sharing about torcs, but also about your experience as an independent researcher. I very much appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to find out more about Tess's work, of course, we'll be sharing the link to the Great Book of Torcs. And check the show notes on the podcast homepage. I'll try to share as many things as possible for the Prehistoric Society, etc. as well. So, hope that everyone enjoyed our journey today. See you next month for another episode of Tea Break Time Travel. I hope that you enjoyed our journey today. If you did, make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll see you next month for another episode of Tea Break Time Travel.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.